Hi, and welcome back to the show. This time we have long-term friend of myself and the community, Kevin Kieller. Kevin is kind of a hybrid of analyst and consultant and gives us an interesting perspective on what's going on with Microsoft versus Cisco versus Zoom in terms of AI. And as usual, we have a pretty lively conversation about what's going on, the kind of convergence of UCaaS and CCaaS, who's doing what. Many thanks to Kevin for taking the time to jump on the show and the discussion. And many thanks to Momentum, who are the sponsor of this podcast. Really appreciate all their support of the community. On with the show. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. This has been long overdue. Kevin and I have had some great conversations off the show, but finally found some time to get together and talk a bit more on the record. So, Kevin, welcome back.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tom. It's great to be here. And yes, now we're smart and we've hit record. So
awesome. So I think most people in the community know you and know your face, but just give us a kind of a brief of your history and what you're focused on at the moment.
yeah, so I say that I'm part consultant, part analyst, and I really started and I would do consulting for large enterprises. Really, very heavily focused in the Microsoft ecosystem and love and know and the Microsoft ecosystem way back from Visual Basic. I mean, I wish they'd bring back something that was as simple and as Visual Basic. But and then of course did all the whole Link and Skype for Business and Teams. But then increasingly, I was asked by vendors, and sometimes the vendors that compete with Microsoft, to assist them with their messaging or some competitive positioning or competitive intelligence. So now I also consider myself a half analyst in that role. As I said, I work directly with vendors, sometimes being a sounding board or saying, hey, I know you think this is a good idea, but look over here what these other people are doing. And sometimes it's help get their message out or help do message refinement. So, I like the dual modes, because hopefully that brings, value. And I always try to, be the person that's the no bullshit person and kind of tells it as it is.
Yeah, I think you do a good job with that. And you do a good job of keeping an eye on kind of the Microsoft, Cisco, Zoom, the big players in our space and what they're all doing. You're always one of my go-tos for I hear they're doing this. What's the actual reality of that?
Yeah, and as you know, I mean, it is challenging to keep up on the reality for one vendor, right? But I think that, I spend a lot of time, kicking the tires and trying things out, and obviously it's changing very quickly. But I think that we all, like if we're IT pros, we all can learn from looking at the other platforms a little bit, because then we could ask our vendors, hey, what about this? And certainly vendors, I think, would be well served by spending a little more time looking at some of the nuances of what their competition is doing really well. And I know, we're going to talk about that, especially in the context of AI.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Our respective beats or communities or content, whatever you want to look at it, has not just, it feels like more than doubled in the sense of you've got to keep an eye on the UCaaS space, the CCaaS space kind of creeps in there as well. And now AI is intrinsically integrated as well. And the AI piece of this puzzle is just moving so fast.
Well, and you see, and I think it's interesting, you call out the very, importantly, that UCaaS, CCaaS blending. And now we also see some of the AI providers, everybody always jostles to be the top of the stack. And so, people are asking a valid question, which is, does unified communications go away because I start and end my day in Claude or whatever or Gemini. And when I want to do a meeting, I ask Claude to set up the meeting and launch the meeting. And I think we're seeing, vendors like, for example, Zoom and their MCP server, you can in Claude, do exactly that. So Zoom is saying, hey, we'll integrate with all these other platforms, but we'll also allow your favorite AI assistant through MCP to access all the goodness of Zoom. So, I think it's an interesting world, and everybody, wants to be the top of the stack, and it's not clear, right? Who will own
Yeah,
that?
I think that's really an interesting point. Like is the core pieces of UCaaS, is it really just infrastructure these days? And I certainly find like you look at where Team Zoom and WebEx have gone and the other players as well, like at their heart, the fundamentals are there or thereabouts on all the major platforms now. Like, yes, we have mobile apps. Yes, it
Right.
works. Yes, like they do transcription. So like some of them have bells or whistles, but the development cycles are so fast now as well. It's not usually month to month. If one has something, the other one doesn't.
Yeah, and I think that this applies, and has applied for several years to, the UCaaS platforms. There was a feature race, and the features are growing faster than I think the adoption of the capabilities by the typical, knowledge worker. So all the bells and whistles, you may list all these things on RFP, but the truth is, for the core features of holding a meeting, all of the players, the top players, and even the, kind of the second tier and third tier players, they all do a fantastic job. And most end users don't use all those bells and whistles, whether it's breakout rooms or some forms of annotation or, fancy displays. They're nice, for people that can leverage those, but for the vast majority of people, there's, whatever, it's the 80-20 rule. I think it's more like the 60-40 rule, like 60% of the features get used.
I'd be surprised if it's 60% if you look at some of the feature stacks, to be honest. But so let's talk AI. How would you surmise how AI has impacted kind of Microsoft's UC strategy, Zoom's and Cisco's?
Yeah, I think that there's broadly, so I'll start there. Broadly, there's different philosophies that I see emerge from, if we look at Microsoft, Zoom, and Cisco. So from, putting on my analyst hat, Microsoft went very quickly and obviously told every product manager to add Copilot. And this is the typical Microsoft approach over time, and this has worked well for them. It's like move fast and add a whole bunch of capabilities. The capabilities were very different when it started, and some of them, quite frankly, were quite poor. And so Copilot initially in Excel was pretty terrible. But this is what Microsoft does well, is then they iterate and they bring it together, and Work IQ. Now there's common context, which wasn't the case a year ago. And so, they're now consolidating and bringing everything up to par, in a sense, where it should be, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And the marketing was way ahead of the reality, which was the biggest challenge. It was a lot of vision and like then people would get their hands on and it wasn't quite there. And I think there's a bit of a challenge with the Copilot branding now where it's like there was so much promised. Actually, things like co-work are pretty impressive, but
Yes.
you've got to re-educate people that it's a different version with the Copilot label on, if you like.
Yeah, so I'd say so, exactly. So Microsoft was like maximal deployment at speed, and then eventually they kind of consolidate it, right? Zoom took another approach, and I think that Zoom has always, taken a beat and spent a little more time simplifying. So, at one point I counted in a Teams chat, there was like 20 different icons that you could click at the bottom. They've filtered those a little bit, but I think Zoom had 5 or 6, because in my mind, Zoom said, hey, let's think about what people really need, and make the interface a little more accessible, right? So I think, so Zoom and the Zoom AI companion, they also chose philosophically to include AI and no additional cost, which was different than Microsoft, where there was the, kind of, they were trying to monetize, $30 per user per month for Copilot. And, so that was a different approach. I think, people respond, Zoom talks about people being, Zoom happy, have happy meetings and whatever. And I think that simplicity and the focus, that does come through. So I think that that's something that they do well that others should look at. And then philosophically, Cisco, they talk about how they've been, doing AI for a very long time. But a lot of times what they talk about, what they mean by that, and it's true, but they're doing like, the AI that just shows up. It's the noise cancellation. It's that when I stand up, it says, oh, Kevin left the frame and I'm going to do a be right back. And then when I get back, their AI assistant knows I was away for 7 minutes and it says, hey, do you want to be caught up on what happened in those 7 minutes? So they're really trying to do, proactive AI to help drive adoption. They've got a very interesting polling agent that during meetings, it will suggest, hey, it sounds like you guys are debating this, to the host. It says, would you want to do a poll? Here's the question and here's the options. Obviously, you can override it. But once again, they're trying to do proactive thing, AI.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because that is actually a solution to the kind of the problem of having the 50 features and the 50 buttons. If the AI could be smart enough to be like, hey, there's a lot going on behind you, maybe we should blur your background, rather than it being like drop down, drop down, drop down, drop down, like that kind of stuff. Or hey, that like there's noise in your background, we're going to auto AI filter it out, or we're going to auto mute you. I mean, I'm still dying for, Teams Fireside Chat, we have 250 people. Like, surely the AI can work out that person's not talking and just there's noise in their background and mute them. Like that seems like a really achievable thing in 2026.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that that's what we all hope for, from our AI assistant or companion or, whatever, and I think we're still working there and the vendors are definitely trying to get there. I think that, we're all faced with how do we use AI does wonderful things. And yet at sometimes it's a big time suck because it seems like it's going to get there. And, whether it's, initially image generation was like that. Right now it does a good job. Like it actually spells things right. And if you give it text, it includes the text. But for a long time, it was so close, right? It was like,
Yeah.
but it's 95% there. And you'd say, gosh, this clearly it's going to take, it's going to get there. But then eventually, maybe a year ago, you'd have to abandon it and just do it yourself if you really cared about the text. Now, obviously, that's not a problem. But I think in a whole bunch of areas, you got two things. You've got, with the Microsoft piece and with other AI, people who've tried it and it didn't live up to their expectations. How do you tell a user that they should go back and try it? I was at Comms V Next and was talking to a gentleman about Copilot in Excel. And I was saying, well, now it's fantastic. And he's like, really? Because I tried it. And he had tried it, whether it was 6, 9 months, 12 months ago, and had concluded it was terrible and was never going to go back and try it. But I said, hey, you really should, right?
And I think that's even more so with like, if we kind of split people into like technical and business, like the business people are busy trying to do their actual job. They haven't got time to experiment for 2 hours to find out the outcome. So I hear the same thing a lot. Like I gave it a shot, it wasn't good enough. And it's hard because a lot of AI is, it'll get you 80% of the way there and the 20%, you can do yourself. But again, that's not a great pitch to business side people because they're like, well, just do it or don't do it. Like it's a new mindset of kind of constantly experimenting. But I agree with you. A lot of people have been burnt by trying things early and not coming back to it.
Right, exactly. And I think another broad thing that is a different topic, but I'd be interested on your take on this is, I think we're seeing, pricing is starting to change because all the vendors right now, AI is expensive. It's expensive from a training perspective and it's expensive from an inference. So when you create an image or have it summarize 300 documents, that inference cost is expensive to the vendor. And so all of the vendors are trying to figure out, well, how do they monetize this? And so, for example, just at the beginning of June, Zoom introduced a new thing called Zoom Mate, which was focused on completion. So they have this like from conversation to completion. So you do a meeting, but after the meeting, you got to actually get your work done. And so the completion part, they have Zoom Mate, but Zoom Mate comes with AI credits. And so there's some consumption billing. In the Microsoft ecosystem, you have that for certain agents. If you start to let external people use that or whatever, there's some consumption billing. And then Cisco, same thing with their agents. Some of it is credit based and some of it's built in. But I think all the vendors are trying to help people figure out what has value. And then if it has value to the organization, they need to figure out how to monetize it, right?
Yeah,
And
I think we're in for a big changes we're coming up to the end of Microsoft's FY, so it'll be next FY, so second half kind of the year. Like, there's no way they can keep going with things like co-work and Scout just being included in a flat plan. It doesn't make any sense. And if you look at what's happening with OpenAI and Anthropic, they've both gone from very big allowances to basically pure consumption for enterprise customers. So on the consumer side, you can buy your $100, your $200 plan, you can thrash it, and they basically treat those as lost leaders,
right.
because they're giving away 5x, 10x the consumption cost in that package, knowing that when people come to the workplace, they'll get the work edition and the business will pay. Something has to happen inside of the Microsoft system, and it'll be the same for Zoom and Cisco. You can't forever subsidize all that inference cost.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think that, and obviously CFOs aren't going to like the unpredictable cost. It was great, when you would buy an E5 or Zoom Workplace or,
Yeah.
we haven't mentioned Google because obviously Google with Gemini and the Google Workplace.
Yeah, isn't it funny we haven't actually, as you say that live? Because I'm like, it's almost frustrating that they have a pretty good AI story and it all span out of DeepMind. They've got an office suite stack. They've got a meeting platform.
Yep.
I feel like they should be more front of mind. They've got all the component parts to do a really good job.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do think that they've got some super smart, research people in the DeepMind and, like a lot of all this like AlphaGo and AlphaZero and the AlphaFold for the proteins. I mean, they're doing some terrific stuff. And Gemini, quite frankly, is pretty fantastic. Like Nano Banana from an image creation. It was my go-to. Now I think ChatGPT has upped their game, and so Microsoft has inherited some of that. It runs slow. That's the one thing I'd say about Copilot. I did some comparison across, and like it's just it takes sometimes what feels like too long of a time.
Yeah.
It says it's lining things up, and then I'm not sure, but that takes a long time. So.
Yeah, but this is again interesting, isn't it? Because how do you scale your compute? Microsoft have 450 million users on the M365 side. They want them all using AI. If you want to be highly responsive to that number of concurrent users, there's a cost there versus, to use all NVIDIA's CPUs, to use to your own chips in-house. Obviously, Google have their own chips. Microsoft now have their own chips as well. But yeah, I would agree with you. And experience-wise, definitely there's times where the new Copilot Image Gen with the Image 2 GPT models, I can trust that now for text and social images. But you're right, you're like set it off, go away, come back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, we're gonna, and also just recently in the news, it seems like this is a cycle where a whole bunch of stories are coming out with people like blowing their yearly AI budgets because they encouraged everybody to, they're like, use AI, whether it's the developers or whatever. And the one company, it's a bit of a clickbaity story, but they somehow got a bill for like $500 million that was unexpected. And I'm like, somebody, like all these platforms allow you to put some caps. So somebody really did not do their job, right?
Yeah, it doesn't go from 0 to millions overnight. Like there's a dashboard.
Yeah, no, exactly. And most of these allow you, you can just like cap it out. But the thing is What I worry about is, and I think that there's an opportunity, if a vendor could come out with a fixed plan and, fixed cost plan, and then make that work. It's kind of like how, Microsoft calling plans, you could pool the minutes. And, when
Mm.
they started, there was like that 3,000 minute plan, and like no one was going to use 3,000 minutes. And so you kind of knew you're paying this and it's effectively unlimited, right? Um, I think that if somebody can figure that out and then, what you said, Tom, like use their own chips or reduce their cost of goods sold, um, that would be that cost predictability for, an enterprise. I think that would be a winner as opposed to consumption billing, where on one hand you're saying, hey, everybody, AI is going to make our organization, more effective, more competitive. So please go use AI. But then you have to say with a little asterisk, yeah, but don't use it too
Yeah,
much.
yeah, use
And
it wisely. Go
yeah, and
experiment, but don't experiment too much.
right. And that wisely part, when you try to go explain that, because I saw in one of the support pages for Zoom 8, the Zoom thing, which has consumption billing, it's saying we'll write detailed prompts and um, avoid asking it to regenerate the entire document or, so yeah, that's good. But, I think we're still trying to get end users to even understand the basic part,
Yeah,
not them.
don't give them a new job to learn, like, specifically how to have to drive it. I think the other thing is model selection is interesting. Like, I'll always go for, the latest Opus model or the GPT Pro where
Right.
I can, but like I'm on fixed plans. Like that isn't the most efficient use case. But I don't think real people want to have to understand which model to pick when. But if the organizations, if the software providers can auto select the right efficient model dynamically, that should make it more efficient as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like for a long time, Zoom and Cisco talked about their federated AI approach. I mean, Microsoft is now bringing in the Anthropic, model. They've also kind of started doing that. But it's like, wouldn't you think that, an artificial intelligence, it should be able to decide, like, is this a simple thing? I can use a small language model. I could, I know there's even research being done to say, hey, what could I do locally on
Yeah.
my user's machine? And I think we're going to see more of that, both for, cost containment, for latency, and also just for privacy, right? There's a lot of, in the rooms, Cisco makes a big point of with some of the NVIDIA chips in their room devices, and it's not just Cisco, but, doing a bunch of things on the edge. That's both fast, efficient, and it also means that things aren't going to the cloud that maybe
Yeah.
you don't want to go to the cloud.
Rooms are a great case for edge because you think about we're all going towards multi-camera and AI direction and things like that. Like it's just not plausible to scale that stuff up to the cloud. Like not for the individual company, but for the providers. Like if Microsoft want everybody with Microsoft Teams room, and I'm sure Zoom want everybody with a Zoom room, you can't have 4 or 5 concurrent cameras streaming up to the cloud and it doing AI direction, and not just the bandwidth, but the AI direction means I need to be AI processing all those frames all the time. So I think we'll see a big push to AI on the edge in rooms because that's where it really ROIs.
Yeah, and I think we get back to, kind of the whole client server model. Like there'll be some things that you're doing in the cloud and some things you're doing on the edge. And whoever figures out the most effective way to do that, I think that they win because it's a cost effective and it's a great user experience,
Yeah.
right?
What's your take on the data conversation? Because I think that's super interesting. Is you've got obviously one of Microsoft's advantages with a Microsoft customer is they've already got you the SharePoint email, like and Teams with chat and meeting transcriptions. Zoom seems to be pushing more towards a suite story where they would have you mainly working in the Zoom ecosystem. Cisco a little bit different, I think. They seem to mainly be we want to be really great UCaaS, CCaaS, air gap devices. But it seems like who can get to the data, who controls the data is a big part of the value prop here.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great point you bring up because I think I wrote an article on No Jitter saying, it was when ChatGPT 5 came out, I said, well, context is more important than having the better model, right? Because, the models are trained on general knowledge, but I mean, in a business context, it's not just often general knowledge. It's like we want it to have access to our knowledge. As you said, for organizations in the Microsoft ecosystem, um, that's a big advantage. But one of the things that, I think all the vendors are doing, Zoom certainly is like it has all these connectors. So you can connect it to Outlook Exchange, both your email, your calendar, also to Gmail. My Zoom is connected to Gmail and Outlook and OneDrive and
Yeah.
Google Drive. So I use Google. I've got our family, so some more personal stuff, but it's all connected. And then they can connect to, the Jiras, the Salesforces, et cetera. Um, and, and Cisco as well uses, they use Glean and they have other connectors as well. And now they've got a WebEx agent that's kind of runs inside of Teams so it can access your WebEx meetings. But I think the challenge is, and I did a session at Comms vNext, how Copilot lies to you. And I'm going to talk about that at Commsverse coming up as well. And that's
Love that
kind of tongue
title.
in
It's
cheek,
brilliant.
but the thing is when you don't understand the context that's being accessed. So, for example, Copilot makes all the AI assistants. When you say summarize this chat, if you don't provide any guidance, it picks an arbitrary. Well, it's not arbitrary; it's given, but I think it's still 30 days back. Right. So similarly, when you say summarize all the emails that Tom sent me, it's going to pick a period of time back. And I think one of the challenges with context, even if you have access to all this wonderful stuff, and even if you've built a semantic index so you can access it quickly, if you don't know how far back or what it's looking at or not looking at, like on SharePoint site, there's a 300 document limit, all
Yeah,
kinds
I
of
feel
things.
like there should be a rule where the UI has to surface like these are my plausible parameters, because there was one point in Teams where it was different backness for meeting chat versus channel chat versus chat, and it was very confusing. I think but you're entirely right. Like whatever the limit is, there is some limit. It's not going every conversation you and I have had over the last 10 years and summarizing it in that chat.
No, and I think this is a place where, hey, all the vendors, take a look at what Zoom's doing, because when you access those other sources, there is a UI and it's kind of like it pops up and says, hey, for these meetings, is it this week, this month, this quarter?
Oh, clever.
And the other cool thing is because you can run into trouble when it accesses meetings you don't want it to, it kind of gives you a list and you can select all, but you can just say, well, wait a second. Oh no, it's these last 3 meetings where Tom and I talked about this particular topic. Yeah, that other one, we got off on a tangent. So
Yeah.
don't include that. So I do think that AI, to your point, has to do a better job of saying, hey, okay, I'm summarizing this, but by the way, I've limited it to 30 days. And if you want, you could ask it or to do more, but we all, you know, being explicit, like, so context is really important, but it can hurt you, if it pulls in something out of date, right?
Yeah, and there's an interesting kind of commercial challenge there. We talked about the consumption of the AI models, but like you look at what Salesforce are doing and ServiceNow and others, they're starting to think about their API charges. And just at build, Microsoft announced Work IQ is going to have an API charge. So yes, they'll build that semantic layer, but you're paying consumption to access it. Not if you use the first party AI, like if you use Copilot, you're cool. But
Right.
actually, if you're building your own agents because you're building ServiceNow agents or you're building ChatGPT agents or Claude agents, then if you want Work IQ, you're going to be charged. And it's going to be the same with Zoom and Cisco. They can use Graph,
Right.
but does Graph stay free forever? I mean, it's going to get absolutely thrashed if people are constantly querying it. It was never really built to deal with that kind of use case, although it's possible. It wasn't just envisioned, was it?
No, and I think, everybody, yeah, it's interesting because everybody is trying to build their own semantic index, right? Because without that, so the semantic index is what like allows you to access things quickly because, and it's not doing exact match. So it is conceptually. So, but if you don't have that, and if you're just saying, hey, SharePoint, give me all these documents, and then you're trying to do summarization, you're going to just like blow your brains out and your consumption, and it's
Yeah.
going to be slow. And so everybody wants to build and maintain a semantic index kind of inside their ecosystem, even for external sources, right? But that also takes storage and compute, and so it's unclear. Yeah, it's unclear who's going to win that battle, and I think no one wants multiple agents that they need to query for different things and gives different answers, and but I think we're in for a little bit of a period of that.
Yeah, I mean the current the current hotness is kind of the OpenClaw, Hermes. Microsoft now released their own variant with Scout and also Pilot, and
Right.
I'm sure sounds like Zoom are doing some of the things where the agent can go off and do computer use and get to multiple systems and bring multiple things together. And
Mm.
it's a really good story. But if you're Salesforce and you used to charge X per user per seat, and suddenly an agent in the business is doing all this work on the Salesforce platform, and you're not, it's one seat, but like it's getting 50 agents thrashing it. That's a different model than what they envisage. And it's the same thing with all the platforms. I think it'll be interesting to see how that works commercially, because I think we're all going to be using some form of proactive agent at some point in time. It just feels like they're getting useful enough that that'll be a reality, but that model doesn't quite align to multi-vendors, multiple data sources.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's just pivot a little bit because to this other thing that I was just thinking about, which is like, I think vendors have over rotated on AI, and now it seems like they did a search and replace and say agentic. Um, you know, I think everybody, and if you're an IT pro, if you're a vendor, if you're an end customer, everybody really should focus on what outcomes are going to be important to your business or your personal brand or whatever, and then figure out if AI or an agentic agent, if that is something that you think is going to get you there. Because I think it's like in the early days of unified communications, people started being over rotated about like, well, I've put everything together. And it's like, okay, but why are we doing that? Is it making our lives any easier? Or is this just like some technical exploration? And a little bit with AI in context and MCP servers, and it's super cool, but everybody just needs to make sure that it's actually making your life less stressful and more productive. And in a business context, especially if you're paying for this, which you will,
Mm.
um, is it actually, driving more sales or reducing my costs? Because if it's not, I would argue that as agentic as it is, and as cool as it is, um, it's kind of distracting you from being successful.
No, I think that's really valid. And it's really hard, isn't it? Because I think it's pretty clear AI on some timeline will be impactful slash of value. But with say UCaaS, to use your example, I've got a couple of a few thousand users. I've got Cisco Call Manager. I assess WebEx and Link or Skype at the time. I'm either ready to jump or I'm not. Nothing really changes for the next 3 years. But in AI, like I can't assess it and then wait for another 3 years. I kind of have to go, well, is it ready now? Is it ready just for the marketing team? Is it ready for the salespeople? Like it's moving so fast that where's the business value conversation is not a one-time activity. It's almost like a constant assessment.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, and to lean into that, I think organizations should really make sure that whoever's experimenting is doing a good job of sharing with other people in the role. Because one of the things that I love in terms of talking to other technology people, or even just other end users, is everybody's thought of something that I haven't thought of in terms of how to use AI. Now, it may or may not be applicable, but sometimes people go like, oh yeah, I used AI to do this. And I'm like, wow, that's a brilliant thing. It really could help me be effective. And I
Mm.
would have never thought of it on my own, right? And so, marketing professionals find out, figure out a way in your organization so that they talk and share amongst themselves, and sales professionals and HR professionals, because it's really the specific use cases, not really kind of the horizontal stuff that I think really drive
Yeah,
some measurable business benefits.
I think that's a really good advice. We do a lot of roundtables, and we've got a legal AI roundtable, and that's been
Mm.
really interesting because if you're, obviously competing businesses in some senses, but if you can talk to your peers that are departmentally aligned but across different companies, that's really helpful. And also all the vendors are pitching everything is the next coming, right? So it's a good to get a reality check on, oh yeah, we tried that and this worked and this didn't, but and as you say, like new ideas of how to make it work as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So all told, I mean, we've covered a lot of topics. Like, obviously, this is an exciting time for technology people. It's also, I think it's a stressful or challenging time for IT pros. End users have to keep up, but then the IT pros as well are struggling to keep up so that they can both advise and answer questions from their end users. Um, and I think things are changing, at least faster than I've ever seen it. How about same for you?
Yeah, yeah, but like for sure faster, and particularly following Microsoft. I've never seen Microsoft internally moving this fast. Like, the autopilots is a great example. Like OpenClaw was, I think, November, that was an open source project, and now we're in June, and Microsoft have their own variant of it, and that's like insane in Microsoft terms to have something
Right.
even in preview that speed. And it speaks to where the market is, and I think you're right. It's a super exciting time for IT because we're slash AI are relevant to the business. So it's important, it's impactful, it's going to change things. But also that means you're moving into advisory, security, risk, choice. Like you're being looked to have an opinion on where things are going and what the business should pick, which is, to your point, yeah, quite hard to keep up. But I'll take the stress with the fun. At least we're super relevant at the moment, which is a good thing.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting, and even IT's role is changing, because a converse session that I'm co-delivering with Tristan Gayford from EY, a
Oh,
senior
great. Oh,
person
that'd be
there.
awesome. Love Tristan.
Well, yeah, so we're looking at, okay, how is AI changing the role of an IT admin? And increasingly, what happens when your end users can, use, Copilot or Claude or whatever to do things that you used to do using
Yeah,
your.
does the support ticket come with the answer steps? They just can't do it because of our back, but they're like, you need to click this, click this, click this, click this, please.
Yeah, well, and all these PowerShell skills that, people have honed, and, now you can kind of ask Claude to do it, but then eventually you just ask it to do it, and it does it, under the covers. So, the role of an IT admin or a Teams admin
Yeah, that's good.
is
That's a
is
great
is likely to
topic.
change. So we're going to explore, some concrete examples of, you know, and what it can do. There's a Teams agent, admin agent, and it can do some things. And so I think that's, yeah, it's interesting, but yeah,
Yeah,
fun
well, I
times.
look forward to seeing you at Commsverse, and that sounds like definitely a talk I'll be at because that is, you're right, that role is changing so radically, and there's a lot of benefits to it, but also there's definitely probably some fear there of like, well, all my skills that I've honed over the last 5, 6, 7 years are now inside of Copilot slash Claude slash ChatGPT.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hey, as we wrap up, Tom, I just do want to kind of thank you, and just like call you out for, just like, you've built this great community of bringing people together. Um, and, I think that that's really important in these times with things changing. I mean, you hold a lot of sessions where I know they're not, some of them aren't recorded, but you get hundreds of people, who can talk freely about things that are working. You bring some great vendor representatives from Microsoft into those. And anyway, I find that super useful, and I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, I appreciate that, and appreciate likewise everything you do for the community, both public and behind the scenes. But yeah, it's great to bring people together, and it's a privilege, although sometimes a stressful privilege, to be part of bringing everybody together.
Yeah, no, well, so thanks for what you do. And yeah, I've enjoyed the discussion. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. See you again soon, Kevin. Thanks a lot.